Welcome to another episode of Courtside with Beilinson Tennis, part of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. We have with us today Vanderbilt University's longest tenured coach. This guest has spent 27 seasons as the head coach of the women's tennis team. He's won 3 National Coach of the Year honors, several Conference Coach of the Year honors. He's guided his team to a national championship in 2015, and as a player, he won the ACC singles title at the University of Virginia slightly before we all had the internet. The list goes on and on. We have a lot to unpack this episode, so without further ado, welcome to the pod, head women's tennis coach for Vanderbilt University, Coach Geoff Macdonald. Coach, thank you so much for taking time tonight and walking us through your journey.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, David.
So, I'll start with the general question that I've asked all my, guests as of late. It's a crazy time. You've never gone through an experience like this. None of us have. Are you doing okay? Your family doing okay? Your team doing okay?
All doing okay. And, it's interesting. We've been having a weekly Zoom. The whole phenomenon of Zoom is incredible. It's going to be interesting to see all of the good that comes out of this. Families eating dinner together, people gardening, exercising more, reading books, understanding how important relationships are. A lot of good will come out of it. Interestingly, I've been playing a lot of tennis, coaching a senior player who's become a really good friend, a guy named Don Napier. And we, for a while, I coach him, so it would have felt like work. And I had this shift a couple of months ago where I just began to really enjoy playing and marvel, instead of it being kind of stale, it felt brand new to me. And that's been a real pleasure in this time.
Oh, I'm sure. Like I said, we have a lot to unpack on this pod. You have had so many awesome experiences through the sport of tennis. I'm curious, how'd you get introduced to the game?
It's actually a simple twist of fate. It was early March of 7th grade. We had just moved from Chicago to Naples, Florida. Naples was not the huge resort, wealthy enclave it is now. There were only about 6 or 8 red lights in the whole town, the whole city. And I was going to baseball tryouts. My mom was driving. Myself and a friend from 7th grade were stopped at a red light, and a guy was waving across the street at his friend at a gas station and hit us at 35 miles an hour. This was pre-seat belts, if you can imagine, 1970. And my mom was whiplashed, and I missed baseball tryouts. And they said, "You missed it. Sorry, play next year." My mom said, I just signed up for a series of tennis lessons, and I can't because of my back. And I had been playing basketball with the tennis guys and did not think highly of that. I was a Chicago Bulls fan.
You're speaking my language, Coach. You're speaking my language right now.
Now, this was Jerry Sloan, Chet Walker, Bob Love,
right.
Winkle.
Pre-MJ days. Pre-MJ days.
But anyway, so I had this idea that the tennis guys weren't, I was a better basketball player. So I went out to play tennis. I took a lesson, and it was so hard, and I was used to doing things pretty well, had kind of a cocky attitude. And one of the tennis guys said, "Hey, do you want to play a couple sets?" And he beat me love and love in about 20 minutes. And I took a ball, and I went to the backboard, and I hit for 90 minutes, and I was hooked. And fell in love with the part. There's so much to fall in love with. Just how hard it is, but also the community. I used to play doubles with 75-year-old men every morning. It was a great, great little world.
Yeah, you hear others that say once they get started with it, there's something about it. They get hooked. You hear it in golf too. You can play so badly, but when you make that 40-foot putt, right, you're hooked. It's the same thing. It's similar with tennis. So obviously you got a lot better from that first experience when you got blitzed 0-0 in about, like you said, a very, very short period of time. You wound up playing college at Virginia, very good school. You won the ACC singles title. How was your collegiate experience playing college tennis?
I really saw the whole gamut of experiences. I think I was too immature to go to college. I played a lot of poker initially. I didn't quite get the books. I passed, but I wasn't that serious a student. And I really didn't live up to my duties as a scholarship athlete. And the coach said goodbye. And I had a motorcycle wreck. And anyway, long story short, I came back in August. I'd rehabbed my Achilles heel, almost got sliced by the motorcycle. And
Now, what year was this in college? He said
my
goodbye to you.
freshman year. And I stayed outside his door and I said, could I be back on the team? He said, no. I was there the next day. He said, no. The third day, I said, if I do one thing wrong, you can kick me off, but give me another chance. And he did. And I worked really hard and kind of climbed. I played 6, 4, 3, and then my last year I played 1. Had an incredible experience. Loved it. My grades got better. I kind of grew up playing college tennis.
Well, I hope that you remember your coach did that for you. So if one of your students through the years messes up one time and they want beg to come back and they'd say the same thing to you, if I screw up one more time, kick me off. But I'm sure you've given kids second chances just because of
absolutely.
How that
David, you're right. I tell that story because, I was really young. And I was, as I said, I was an immature 18-year-old, and college was so much freedom right away. I just didn't do too well with it. But I am very conscious of these kids are maturing. They're young. I try to always look at the world through their eyes and understand. I wonder what it's like to be 19. You're pre-med. You're really worried about grades, and then you got so a lot of what we try to do with tennis is work at it, but not make it this hugely stressful, pressurized sport.
There's already so much pressure, especially competing at the high level that your kids compete at.
Right.
You want to add to that, obviously.
Right.
You not only were successful in college, but you played on the pro tour. You had some really, really good wins. Guys against like David Pate. I think he's from Las Vegas, actually. Wally Masur,
Yep.
Jakob Lasik. Those guys are good, solid pros, and you guys beat them. How was playing professional tennis for those few years?
It was really an incredible experience. I got to go all over the world. Like if I had a choice between playing a satellite in the United States or going to Europe, I went to Europe. And I just always tried to go all over. Played the Australian satellite. Played, I loved playing on clay in Europe. Beat a guy named Juan Aguilera once on clay. It's the best win of my life.
Yeah,
and
he was really good on clay.
The umpire was making bad calls, and he and I would overrule the umpire in favor of each other.
That's
and
nice.
So we became very friendly, like, not through the years, but like just while I saw him at tournaments, there was a respect because we both just wanted the match to be fairly played and took it into our own hands.
No, that's great. And, it's interesting what you said about traveling. If there was something in the States versus something overseas, you would go overseas. Evan King, who's a very good player, He's from Chicago. And his interviews, and I've had him on my podcast as well, he said the same thing. He said, look, when am I going to have the opportunity to go to these places? I'm not taking, when I'm married and have kids, it's very hard to take a family of 4 or 5, whatever, to these places.
Sure.
I have no business being in these places. Let's use tennis to kind of experience that. And it's interesting that you kind of echoed Evan's thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I encourage all of our players to do while they're here is go play in France, the whole money circuit in France, which really, if we were going to get serious about U.S. tennis, if we just started regional money tournaments, almost like UTR, or it's level-based, which is what they do in France, and just let people play a lot. It's not – I look at junior tennis, it looks miserable. There's no sort of soul or culture to the tournament. It's just like go to that court and play, and the parents look miserable, the kids. This should be a really fun game, and we seem to be finding a way to make it not as much fun as it could be.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I know, like entities like UTR, they're trying to change that a little bit, trying to make it much, much more of a positive experience. And like you said, just give kids opportunities to play more and more. Obviously, the bulk of your career has been in coaching. So after you played a few years on the Pro Tour, you transitioned into coaching. Was that something you knew you wanted to do? Did you have a couple mentors that kind of pushed you that way? I believe you started your career at LSU, and then you went to Duke, and then you went to where you are currently at Vanderbilt.
I mean, I've been incredibly lucky. Did I aspire to be a college coach? No. I mean, it wasn't like I'm not. I really kind of think life brings you opportunities and you respond to them rather than having a master plan. I mean, I believe in, having goals and things you're trying to do, but LSU came up. I've been really lucky to land at incredible institutions. I mean, I've coached LSU's SEC, Duke's ACC, Vanderbilt's SEC. So I've been just really, really fortunate. And I'd originally wanted to get a PhD in English and teach. And I kind of thought a cool life might be teaching small college and being a tennis coach. Again, it wasn't a hard and fast plan. But when I got into coaching at LSU, similar to when I started playing tennis, the difficulty of the endeavor hooked me. I was like, this is really hard. You've got 3 doubles teams, 6 singles. You're managing a lot at once. You're trying, and it's super emotional. There's pressure, and there's so much that goes into it in terms of physical training, mental training, the technique, the tactics of doubles, all the different stuff. And then while you're doing that, you're forming really good relationships with incredibly interesting, vibrant young people. And then you're part of the intellectual community of the university. It's been an incredibly lucky and fortunate way to go.
Yeah, for sure. And it's the relationships that you develop over those years, especially how long you've been into it. That's the best. I mean, I'm sure you've gone to weddings, you've seen kids being born of your student. I mean, that to me is the best part. So you started LSU, you head on to Duke, you then end up at Vanderbilt. There's something obviously you love about Vanderbilt because you've been there, 27 years. You've had incredible success. Like I said, you've been SEC Coach of the Year several times. Your team won the NCAA championship in 2015. And just kind of looking at your team's record over the years, just the consistency of being very, very good and competing very highly, competing for the highest of stakes. And it's not always about being the last person standing or the last team standing.
Right.
Sometimes that's out of your control.
Right.
In sports in general, when you're competing at that highest level, wherever it is, you just hope to give yourself enough opportunities to knock down that door. And you guys seem to be at such that high level year in and year out. Talk a little bit about your philosophy, the kids you look to recruit, and how you get your teams to consistently compete at the highest level.
Wow. Well, I learned a lot at LSU, and that was a super development job. In the third year there, we got to the NCAAs, which at that time was only 20 teams. So to get into the NCAA tournament was pretty hard. You had to have a pretty convincing case to kind of unseat an established team and get in as a newcomer. At Duke, I learned a lot about coaching elite players and what it's like at the top level, and I made a lot of mistakes, I think. First year, we were Final Four. We were consistent, Final Four, quarters, those 3 years. But
yeah, that's pretty good, Coach. That's pretty good.
I think I learned a lot. I think I made a lot of mistakes in being too results-oriented at a young age. And then when I came over to Vanderbilt, I was struck by the potential of the school to become an elite to great school, as is Duke and as is LSU. But they've not tapped into their athletic potential as much. I think we're beginning to, and I think we really can. I saw an opportunity. I've always liked development. I like finding someone, and maybe it's because I was like this. I was certainly not a good junior, and the coach took a chance on me. So I love finding someone who genuinely loves the game and they really want to work at it, and you build that relationship, and when you get a group of players improving and all going in the same direction, it's like being in the eye of a hurricane. It's an incredible feeling of, wow, we're really getting better. And that's always been rocket fuel for me as a coach. Love that.
Yeah, that's the magic right there. And I think especially this sport is so hard, and the level that your team is competing at, it's so hard that if you don't love, and I didn't say like, if you don't love competing, it's going to be very, very hard, because it is what it is. This sport, especially at the level that your teams are competing at, is very difficult, and you have to love to be able to compete. You have to love, Rafael Nadal always says, right, you have to embrace the suffering. And
Yeah,
that's what it is. That's not for everybody. But if you can
right.
find those people, and if you, like you said, get everybody on the same page, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah. So, a lot of people, the recruits I get, they're really good players, but we've gotten very few top 10 juniors, maybe one or two. And all the time I've been here, we get a lot of kids 10 through 40, sometimes lower. I like looking for someone who's, the phrase I use is under tennis. They've played. Christina Rosca, who's an All-American here, will end up going to medical school after she plays the tour. Was a good junior, but it was us in the Ivies, quite frankly. And people didn't see her, and I kept thinking she's playing 4 days a week in Princeton, New Jersey, taking 5 AP classes at a tough high school, and she loves the game. And she's been an incredible player for us. And there are a lot of stories like that. And again, those kids come in with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder and some intrinsic motivation that can have them surging by a kid who maybe is a little tired of it. And you're right, it's such a hard game. We look for, I think the number one predictor of success in tennis is if you love the game. Yeah. Long-term, like collegiate and pro level success. You got to love it or don't do it. It's just too hard.
It's too hard. I agree 100%. And in talking with you prior to this podcast, no matter how long you've been in it, you always have that growth mindset of trying to learn. And you've done some cool projects as, an example is you wrote for the New York Times for a number of years. You wrote that blog. And when we were prepping for this, you told me how much that helped you as a coach. If you can talk a little bit about the type of project you did for the New York Times and how that helped you look at certain things in a different way that, look, you've been involved a very, very long time. You haven't solved the puzzle 100%. No one will ever. You're constantly trying to improve. And we'll get into, like I said, you'll talk about the New York Times, and there's also a documentary that we'll talk about afterwards.
Okay. Want to talk about the Times first?
Yeah, let's talk about the Times first.
Okay. So in 2009, I actually got to know a writer on the New York Times, maybe around 2005, who was doing a kind of expose on the international older pro phenomenon in college. It's kind of a loophole where for a few years there, schools were bringing in, older people who played the tour, sometimes like 100 tournaments. And then they're coming in and competing as freshmen against an 18-year-old, played high school tennis the year before. Right. Guess who won? But, so anyway, I got to know them, and they sort of exposed the hypocrisy of that, and the rules got changed. And they got changed where we stopped worrying about if you made any money in a pro tournament, but come to college right out of high school. And I think that benefits everybody, and it made it a little more fair for everyone. But anyway, I got to know them, and I got a call saying, would you write? We're starting a blog called Straight Sets. And I thought, yeah, sure. And I didn't think it would be, when I first thought, wow, what an honor, because I love reading the Times. I try, when I would get the print paper, I'd try to read it cover to cover and learn a lot. But I realized I can watch a match. Well, do you really know how to write about it? Do you know how to talk about it? Do you know how to explain concepts to people? No. So I had to learn analytics. I had to learn sort of the state of the game on the pro tour. So one of the things I always do when I go to tournaments, I don't care if it's a junior tournament, if I can meet anybody, if you and I meet in Chicago, I'm going to try to pick your brain. That's so I'd go out on the tour and I just get to know somebody a little bit and go, what happens here? How did that person get good? Wow, that guy jumped from 50 in the world up to 8. What do you hear? And they go, oh, this, and this. And then I would kind of go down that rabbit hole and learn and find out. And it really reinvigorated me as a coach. And I really believe that one of the things that's important in coaching is constant reinventing. Make it new, make it fun. Like if you're saying, well, this is what I did back in my day, it just falls flat. And this generation needs to know that you know what you're talking about, and so I just took a pride in learning and delving into matches, and I got to do a bunch of neat things. I got to do some graphic interactives Federer's footwork,
Yeah.
Nadal's forehand. Did a really cool thing last year on the evolution of the grip, the forehand grip, from continental to Kachanov, like super Western.
Yep.
And like, how did that evolve and why? So it's been a really neat learning experience. One year I've gotten to go to press conferences, sit in the back. I don't ever ask a question, but it's amazing. You go to a Federer press conference, English first, then he'll do French,
Amazing.
then he'll do German, then he'll do Swiss German.
Amazing.
Nadal does English, Spanish, Catalan, and you're up close with these guys, and they are so smart about the game and so intelligent about it. Murray, Djokovic, those top four are so amazing. The way they dissect, your James Blake podcast where he dissects the fifth set tiebreaker with Agassi. That what those high level players are learning, and and what he conveyed in your podcast, it's incredible.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Thanks for stating that. Yeah, that was so cool of James,
yeah, awesome.
and it was awesome. I mean, I remember going through it, and he was so open about it, so cool about it. He didn't, he didn't hide anything about it. It was so cool. So for anyone listening, right. It's so good for coaches and your teams. James,
absolutely.
What Coach Macdonald is saying is James dissected point by point of that 2005 U.S. Open quarterfinal match versus Andre that ended like at 2 a.m. And to hear the mindset of the elite was super cool by James. So thanks, Coach.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing we talked about was this documentary. I think it was in 2018. It's called Insight to Greatness. And it interviewed the 3 main people on it were Pele, the legendary soccer player, Jerry Rice, the San Francisco 49er wide receiver, and Wayne Gretzky. And I watched that documentary, and it was so cool. And Wayne Gretzky, in any interview that he's on, I just get mesmerized when he starts talking. And he had a couple of quotes.
He's magnetic.
Magnetic. There were a couple of things that stood out, and he said his dad told him this. He goes, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And the other thing that he mentioned was, as a junior on his junior hockey team, they were good, but they kept playing another team and they kept losing. And on the ride home, he was frustrated, and his dad looked at him and his dad said to Wayne, he goes, yeah, you're not beating them now, but not one of those players on that team is going to go to the NHL. And his dad was right. Not one of those players went to the NHL. And yet there were 4 guys on Wayne's team that was losing, the team that was losing, 4 guys that went to the NHL. And the reason why Wayne's dad said that was that the team that was winning at that time, they were way too structured, way too organized, way too rigid. Organized, maybe not the right word, but way too structured, way too rigid. Whereas Wayne's team was a little bit more creative, and coaches didn't kind of get in their way and let their natural abilities just win out. And I know we've talked about it a little bit. And how do you kind of incorporate that with your squad as far as not hindering, any of these players' individuals' creativity?
It's a really good question. First of all, I view tennis, I think it's a super creative sport. You're making decisions. You could take a backhand, you could slice it, you could hit over it, you could drop it. You can go, there's different height. Learning all that ball control and learning, first of all, it's fun. It's fun to play and to learn. And yet short term, that player tends to lose. And we're such a short-term culture right now. Like, again, back to junior tennis, I look at kids and I go, they're not being taught some ways of thinking and playing that could really help them to make the game more fun. And I think learning the kind of, overly planned out way, it might work, but ultimately it's boring, and we do a lot of what I enjoy doing the most is what I call individuals. And we keep it really relaxed. Like if they're up late studying, they text me and say, I'm not going to be there at 8, or I'll or they come at 8, I'm there. And you get to know the player and you get to know their personality. And you say, hey, this is an interesting thing back to the times. I was at a press conference and Nadal kept using the word solutions. Like, I'm looking for the solution on this ball. And I went, that's a really interesting way to look at it, right? And you look at how he changes his game to adapt to opponents. It's amazing. So you teach players that, like, you know, they're struggling with a ball wide, running wide to the forehand, and they will often make an error. And you go, what's a different solution there? Let's come up with some things. And then you stop and maybe pull it out and work on that. And I like to give things names. So, and often with the player and I have our own language, right? And I'll yell out, you know, that was a great Andy Murray. So Andy Murray's when you run wide and you loop up the line on the forehand, which gives you time to get out of the corner. And then he has such a good backhand, the ball comes back to his backhand. Mm-hmm. So you teach him that, and you go, oh, and then another one we do is you'll run wide on the backhand to defend, and you sense the players coming in. Mm-hmm. You teach them to hit the ball softer at the feet, so they give you time and they volley up. I've not had a player come into Vanderbilt who was taught that in the juniors. So, you know, they chip it, but they chip it and the player just volleys it away. Yeah. You know, a lot of them can't lob like old school sky lob or underspin lob.
Right.
And
it's all topspin lob.
You just make it fun. And we, you know, a lot of what we do in practice are kind of games-based stuff. You know, we'll play, I'm trying to think of a game. Well, one we do is, I call it the McEnroe game. You're at the baseline, I'm at the net. The doubles alleys are good. We play the half court. The player at the baseline uses a continental grip and must hit a chip or a lob. They can't hit over the ball. Okay. So, and they win the point if it bounces. So if I hold the ball and you think I'm going to dink you and then I lob, I might get the ball over your head, etc. So it teaches a really interesting spatial awareness for the player at the baseline to learn there are other ways to beat a player at the net other than just blasting a passing shot. It also teaches the net player how to read a racket, how to go back for an overhead, plant, come back in, play a low volley with feel, you know, etc. So it's a cool, without teaching all those skills, like let's go back and hit the overhead and plant and come back, they have to do it because it's a game. So I really believe in that kind of coaching.
No, that's so great. And thank you for sharing that. We can do this for hours, Coach. Like I said, you've been in this game for a long, long time. And I see the energy just in talking with you before. I see the energy and the joy that you have in talking about it now. It's just very impressive, obviously. And you know, to be successful at anything in life, to really be successful at anything in life, I think you really got to love it. And it truly, we truly see that out of you. And my favorite part about doing all these is hearing the different people's journeys, because every journey is different. None are the same. It's none of the same. And you can, like you said, finding solutions. There are multiple ways to come up with an answer. It's not just, you don't have to be pigeonholed to do it one way. Right. And again, that comes into like tennis being part of chess, like just trying to figure it out. And this has been a pleasure talking with you. This really is. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. You know, but the Gretzky, that documentary, all three of those players talk about the importance of the street. Playing, like Pele said, his best coach was the street, going out and playing. We don't do that enough with young tennis players. You know, I was lucky. I grew up at a public park in Naples. It costs $2 a year to play. Yeah. We had a Wimbledon champion come out of there. Joanne Russell won Wimbledon doubles in '77. It was a little dinky public park, but you could go just play. Yeah. And, you know, that would be a cool thing to get back into tennis.
That's just so structured now. It's so structured. And I remember Gretzky in that documentary. Sorry. Yeah. He was practicing with a tennis ball bouncing on ice because it bounced way higher than a puck would. So when the puck bounces on the ice, he was used to that already, and he was able to handle that puck better than, you know, everybody else. And again, that goes back to the creativity and just playing. And
yes,
everything is just so structured now. You lose something, and you lose something to that creativity that we start. But
yeah, you know, the other thing is developing a little later is okay. In fact, it's probably healthier. Again, back to the Bulls, the great documentary that was just on, was it The Last Dance?
Yep.
Jordan was cut in 10th grade from the varsity, played JV. Pippen was a manager. Rodman was at JUCO and not very good, and they loved it and they kept working at it and they became legendary. Whereas I think in tennis we try to identify everybody. You got to be great by 12 or 14, not necessarily.
Yeah, so true. Coach, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I appreciate it. And if you don't mind, we may want to have you back on again if you don't have
it'd be
any
my
problems
pleasure,
with
Dave.
because you got so much to offer.
No, I love talking tennis, and you're doing great work. I'll be listening to your podcast religiously. So well done.
Thanks, Coach. Hey, most importantly, stay safe, you, your family, and your team. It's crazy, but hopefully we'll get through this sooner rather than later. So best of luck to you and your teams going forward, and looking forward to 2020, 2021, right? That academic year.
I know. Awesome. Thank you, David.
See ya. Bye.